It's hard to believe, but it's been a whole year since we established our new dream garden here on my homestead. And today I want to take an opportunity to kind of reflect on the evolution of this dream garden, some of the things we've done to improve it, some of the mistakes we made along the way, and just how everything's progressing as far as this being a productive garden area. If this is your first time on our channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below and that bell button so you get notified every time we come out with a new video. And if you are a frequent viewer of our channel, it's always good to have you back. So this area right here is what we call our dream garden. And it basically consists of 6 subplots that are 30 by 35, and we have 10-foot walkways or pathways between each plot. Now, just around a year ago, this whole dream garden area was covered in small pine trees like you see right there. The only difference was that I had mowed between mine here that were on this plot. So we had to dig up pine trees, stack them up, wait on them to dry up enough to burn. Did a good bit of cultivation and harrowing to get this area ready. So there's a lot that went into getting this dream garden established. Now, patience has never been a strong point of mine. Just isn't in my gene pool. And if I would have been a patient person, I probably would not have been in such a hurry to get these garden plots into production. I probably could have did a little more to build the soil and increase the fertility here before I planted. And I learned that lesson the hard way because several of these plots didn't perform very well last spring. And it came down to being basically a fertility issue. My pH was pretty good, but I learned quickly that there just wasn't a whole lot of nutrients in that soil. You know, with those pine trees there, I guess they had just kind of sucked everything out of the soil, and I needed to do a lot more supplementation of nutrients than what I actually did. Now, these carrots here are about the 3rd crop I've had in this plot right here. But the first crop that I planted in here was tomatoes. And instead of putting compost over the entire plot, I used my FAD system that I've used successfully in a lot of other plots. And I just put compost or amendment along the row where I was going to plant there. And that technique works great for me in some of my more established plots where my nutrient levels are up to par, they're not depleted like these were. So first lesson I learned was I really needed to compost or amend, put that chicken manure compost over the entire plot because, like I said, these things were pretty void of nutrients. So I learned that lesson from the first crop I grew in these plots. And on the second crop that I grew on these plots, I applied that chicken manure compost to the entire plot and I tilled it in good. And everything did much better once we got those fertility levels up. So another obstacle we faced is the soil structure or the soil workability. Now, as opposed to some of my more established plots like those back there, which are nice and sandy, really easy to work. These plots here have a lot more clay in them and they crust over bad and get hard, and they're just not as workable as some of my other plots. So that's been another challenge we've had to deal with. Now, as I grow more crops in these plots, it gets easier and easier to work. The more organic matter we build up in these soils, the better it gets. So if you have tough soils out there, you can do things like heavy composting. Cover cropping helps, which we've done a lot of in here. But it also helps just to start growing stuff in them. Grow some root crops. Potatoes do a really good job of breaking down the soil. Carrots, beets, radishes, things like that. You know, of course I should have been more patient here and probably did some better things to build the soil. But, you know, if you don't have that time, just start growing stuff in them. Those plant roots will help to break down those soils and make them nice and soft. And over time, as you keep growing stuff in them, your soil will get better. A good example of that is these carrots right here. Now, these aren't the biggest carrots I've ever grown by any means, but they're better than they would have been if I would have grown them first thing in this plot here. So we cover cropped and and did some things to build this soil here. And these carrots aren't bad. You know, that one there is probably 3 to 4 inches long, whereas normally in my sandy soil it would be, you know, 6 to 7 inches long. But these things do a good job of getting down here and kind of tickling that soil. You can see this stuff here is pretty workable, so it's getting a lot better, and we'll just keep getting it better. The next time we grow carrots here, they should be even bigger than that. So now let's talk about just the general overall design. And I've had a lot of customers and viewers recently sending me diagrams and telling me they're going to set up their own dream garden, which is a great idea, and asking how big should their plots be, how many plots should they have. The number of plots is up to you, depending on how much land you have and how much time you have to manage those. But the big thing here is I really like a square plot. Now, some vegetables it's not going to matter. Things like broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, whatever, it doesn't matter. But for things like corn, you really want a square plot. For things like watermelon or pumpkins, a square plot really seems to work well. So regardless of your plot size or how many plots you have, I would recommend going with a square plot or getting it as square as you can. You know, ours aren't perfectly square at 30 by 35. 40 by 40 is a great plot size, especially if you're using small hand tools like the wheel hoe like we do. Now let's talk about water. So my dream garden is fed by a spigot right up there against my house. I have these big 3/4 inch water hoses, 200 feet of them, that I use to feed these plots here. Now, whether it be overhead irrigation or drip irrigation like you see on this carrot plot here, I put all my water hookups on the inside of these plots, not on the outside over there. And that makes it easy, so I can just move water hose from one plot to the next. I don't have to drag the hose around each plot and all that kind of stuff. So I always water from the inside of the plot going out that way. I always put my drip hookups here on the inside, and that makes everything real easy. And when I need to come in here and mow these pathways, I can just take this and flip it over like that so I don't hit it with a lawnmower. Now, I've had several people ask about putting a spigot or spigots in the middle of the garden, and I have contemplated putting one spigot in the middle of this dream garden. It would make things a little easier for me. But as far as multiple spigots go, I wouldn't recommend putting a spigot at each plot or a valve at each plot. Dad did that with his dream garden and kind of regrets it a little bit. It makes it difficult when you're using that easy flow injector to feed through your drip system. It's best to leave that injector at your main spigot. That way all you have to do is move the water hose when you want to fertilize a different plot. If you have a spigot at each plot, you got to move that injector tank to each different plot every time you want to fertilize a different one. So I don't think having a spigot at each plot is necessary, and I think over time, especially if you're injecting, it will actually become quite cumbersome. Now, one thing I did to make it easier pulling the water hose in between these plots is I put these little rebar stakes on the corner of each plot there. And what that does is it marks off where the plot's going to be, so my plots don't get bigger or smaller. They stay the same size. I always know how big they are. And also put these caps on top of them just in case anybody, the kids or anybody, falls on them. It's not going to hurt them. But these make great hose guides. So your hose will, be guided around that piece of rebar there, and you don't have to worry about it getting into your crops or whatever you have planted. Now, the primary reason for establishing this dream garden in the first place was mainly for crop rotation. I had 4 other plots before I added these 6, and within those 4 plots, because we grow a good bit of vegetables around here, we were pushing those 4 plots pretty hard. We weren't able to give them a break, and it became tough to rotate things. We like to stay on a 2 to 3 year rotation as far as planting the same family of crops in the same spot, and that became tough with those 4 plots, especially with things like cucurbits, because there's so many different cucurbits we plant. Squash, summer squash, winter squash, cucumbers, things like that. So the addition of 6 more plots allows us to give certain plots a break, cover crop them, build the soils, and in the long term it really helps with our pest and disease control. You know, rotation can be tough if you've just got one big garden plot, because there's only so many ways you can flip that plot and plant different families in a different spot. But when you've got separate subplots, it makes it real easy. Okay, I'm going to plant squash here this spring, and then tomatoes there next spring, and then maybe corn there next spring. And we'll talk about this rotation in some more specific detail on a future video. We'll actually talk about our rotation here in the Dream Garden, what we planted last year in each plot and what we're going to plant this year in each plot. So whether you have a 1/4 of an acre to work with, like this Dream Garden here is, or a smaller space, or maybe even a bigger space, I would highly recommend splitting it up into subplots and creating your own Dream Garden. I think you'll find it makes things way more manageable. You know, cultivating a 100-foot row by hand, you'll get wore out pretty quick doing that. But if you got things split up into just 30 or 40-foot rows, it just makes it so much more manageable. You don't get overwhelmed, and you just feel better about it. You know, you can come out here in the afternoons and say, okay, I'm gonna take care of this plot today. The next day I'm gonna work on this plot. And you can establish kind of an easy schedule there to keep everything in good shape so nothing gets out of hand on you. And your Dream Garden doesn't have to be a big in-ground garden. It could be a raised bed garden for that matter. But the principles remain the same. You want to practice good crop rotation, and you want to give those plots or those raised beds a break every now and then, nurture that soil and build them back up so they perform better the next time you plant a vegetable crop there. So if you've made your own Dream Garden, I'd love to hear about it. Put that in the comments below. If you're thinking about building a Dream Garden and you have some specific questions about how to set it up and all that good stuff, put those in the comments below as well, and I'll be glad to try to answer them for you. If you enjoyed this video, give me a big like, give me a big thumbs up, and a big share, and go check out these other videos here that we did when we first started this Dream Garden, so you can kind of see how it started and how it's changed since then.